I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this is the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. New York receives its second NHL franchise in 2 years as the New York Rangers arrive on the scene. The Rangers are joined by two more teams, the Chicago Blackhawks and Detroit Cougars, formerly the Victoria Cougars of the WHL, expanding the NHL to 10 teams. The NHL divides into two divisions, Canadian and American, lengthens the schedule to 44 games. The demise of the Western Hockey Leagues results in the Stanley Cup coming under the exclusive control of the NHL. Conn Smythe, who was instrumental in assembling the Rangers, is fired before the season because of a management dispute. On February 14, 1927, the Toronto St. Pats are sold to Hugh Aird and Conn Smythe. Their nickname is changed to the Maple Leafs. Star players from the defunct Western Leagues proliferate the NHL. Eddie Shore joins the Bruins, Bill and Bun Cook sign with the Rangers, and Frank Foyston and Frank Frederickson go to Detroit. Lester Patrick, a Maverick in the West, returns to the East. He takes over the Rangers and will lead them to dominance in the early years. Bill Cook, the speedy right winger who plays with his brother Bun and center Frank Boucher on the Rangers' top line, wins the goal-scoring title as well. Points, 33 goals, 4 assists, 37 points. Fellow first-year NHLer Dick Irvin, who cruises the left wing with Mickey McKay and Babe Dye in Chicago, leads the league in assists with 18 and is second in total points with 36. Herb Gardner, in his first year with the Habs, is a mountain of strength on defense and wins the Hart Trophy. The Ottawa Senators, boasting such stars as Cy Dennehy, Alex Connell, Heck Kilray, Frank Niebor, and George Boucher, won their last Stanley Cup in 1927. The 27 finals were historic in a couple of ways. It was the last time Ottawa appeared in a Cup Series, and it was the first time the two NHL teams faced off in the decisive match. Games 1 and 3 were washed out because of bad ice conditions, but Ottawa won Games 2 and 4 to win the Silver Bowl. When the Western Hockey League collapsed in 1926, most of the Victoria Cougars found a new home in the Motor City. The new franchise was called the Detroit Cougars and featured such stars as Frank Foyston, Frank Frederickson, and Hap Holmes. The Cougars, though, had little bite, finishing in the cellar with the newly created American Division. His entry in the Hockey Encyclopedia shows Canadians Herb Gardner as a 35-year-old rookie in 1926-27 season who scored just 6 goals and 12 points. As is so often the case, the stats miss the point entirely. Gardner was a natural athlete who, when he joined the NHL in 26-27, was already a seasoned hockey man. He had played with the Winnipeg Vicks as early as 1908. Gardner's veteran leadership that was so great, he earned the 26-27 Hart Trophy. When Bill Cook entered the NHL for the 26-27 season, he was a ready-made star for the expansion New York Rangers. 3 times a scoring champion with the Saskatoon Sheiks of the WCHL, Cook was used to the limelight, if not the bright lights of Broadway. In his rookie season with the Rangers, he fired in 33 goals and added 4 assists to lead the league in both goals and scoring. A new love affair began in Toronto on February the 14th of 1926. Conn Smythe, business tycoon and hockey man, purchased the NHL's Toronto St. Patricks and renamed them the Toronto Maple Leafs. For Smythe, a true patriot, the Maple Leaf was a proud symbol. It had been worn by soldiers and would one day be stitched into the Canadian flag. The Toronto club, however, had little to be proud of in 1926-27 as it finished last in the Canadian division. Still going strong, the Ottawa Senators survived the infusion of talent and remain atop the standings, taking the Canadian division with 30 wins in 44 games. Alex Connell, Ottawa's brick wall in goal, tallies 30 wins, 13 shutouts, a 1.57 goals against average. Canadian George Hainsworth, who replaces George Vezina, the first recipient of the Vezina Trophy given to the goalie for the team that allows the fewest goals, Hainsworth records 14 shutouts. Maroons goalie Clint Benedict leads the NHL in goals against average with 1.51. The first-year Rangers ride the goaltending of Lauren Chabot, 1.56 goals against average and 10 shutouts, and the scoring of Frank Boucher and the Cook brothers to a first-place finish in the American Division. The New York Americans, playing in the Canadian Division, finish 4th, but Billy Birch, with 19 goals, wins the Lady Byng Trophy. In the playoffs, the Bruins trounce Chicago in a total goals preliminary round, then knock off the Rangers. The Canadians nip the Maroons but fall to Ottawa in the next round. With the score tied 0-0 after 2 OT periods, Game 1 of the finals is called off due to bad ice in Boston. Ottawa tops the Bruins 3-1 in Game 2. Game 3 of the finals is tied 1-1 after one overtime period when the match is called off again due to deteriorating ice conditions. Cy Dennehy scores twice in Game 4, leading Ottawa to a 3-1 cup-clinching victory. It's the Senators' last Stanley Cup victory. In the long annals of professional hockey, there have been many instances where goaltenders have been hurt and unlikely replacements rushed in to plug the gap. But the granddaddy of all such episodes, and by far the most stirring, involved New York Rangers coach-manager Lester Patrick in the 1928 Stanley Cup Finals. It was Game 2, with the Montreal Maroons leading the series 1-up. The entire final round had to be played in Montreal because the Barnum and Bailey Circus was firmly camped in the Rangers' home at Madison Square Garden. After a scoreless first period in Game 2, Montreal center Nell Stewart fired a blast that impacted Rangers goalie Laurent Chabot right above the eye. Chabot would not continue. Without a spare goalie, Patrick requested that Alex Connell, the Ottawa Senators netminder, who happened to be sitting in the stands, be loaned to New York for the duration of the game. But the Maroons denied Patrick's request. Furthermore, NHL President Frank Calder informed Patrick that he had 10 minutes to find a suitable replacement before the game would be considered a forfeit. With time running out, Patrick astonished the onlookers by choosing himself to play goal, a position he had never played in his life. "We thought at first that it was just a mild injury to Chabot's eye," said Patrick. "Some of the boys said, 'Lester, you go in there,' but I said no, I didn't want to. However, they persisted, so I donned Chabot's uniform, skates, and what have you, and everything fit like a glove, except the skates. I took care of that by putting on an extra pair of socks." The presence of the 44-year-old replacing the capable Chabot caused an eruption of laughter from the Forum crowd, but they were soon silenced as the Rangers built a human wall in front of Patrick. When necessary, Patrick performed superbly, stopping 15 of the Maroons' 16 shots, preserving a 1-1 tie at the end of regulation. "Lester was an inspiration to the rest of us," said Frank Boucher. Although his antics were somewhat overdrawn, "Let them shoot," he'd cry. Just as loudly from behind our bench came the voice of temporary Rangers coach Odie Gleichhorn. "For God's sakes, don't let them shoot." With 7+ minutes to go in OT, the puck skittered behind the Maroons' goal and was snared by Rangers defenseman Ching Johnson. Boucher was stationed in front of the net and yelled for the pass. "Ching pushed the puck to me," Boucher recalled, "and I sent it into the net." The time was 7:05 and the Rangers had scored an improbable victory. For Game 3, Patrick used goalie Joe Miller, whom he borrowed from the New York Americans. Montreal won the third game 2-1, but the Rangers were undaunted. Miller posted a 1-0 shutout in Game 4, and New York took a 2-1 victory in Game 5, thus clinching the series. Had it not been for Patrick, Montreal would have taken the second game, and probably the cup as well. In the interest of encouraging offensive play, rules are adopted to allow forward passes in the defensive and neutral zones. A goal net designed by Art Ross with double curved back and flex netting to better catch the pucks is adopted for use in the NHL. In Chicago, the season begins with the dismissal of coach Pete Muldoon, whose first-year Hawks had finished in third place in 1926-27. Pete Muldoon is so upset by his firing that he affixes a hex on the entire Chicago franchise, saying it will never win an NHL title. His prophecy will come to be known as the Curse of Muldoon. Barney Stanley is hired to coach the Hawks, and they drop the cellar with a 7-34-3 record. Their 2 home wins are the fewest ever by an NHL team. Habs goalie George Hainsworth allows just 48 goals in 44 games, finishing with a league-high 26 wins, 1.09 goals against average, and 13 shutouts. He earns the Vezina Trophy. Hal Winkler's 1.59 goals against average is the best in the American division as his Bruins capture the division title. Ottawa's Alex Connell strings together an amazing 6 straight shutouts, more than 440 minutes of scoreless hockey en route to his outstanding 1.30 goals against average. Frank Boucher, the class of the Rangers, wins his first of 7 Lady Byng trophies. His club finishes second in the American division. Montreal's Howie Morenz becomes the first NHLer ever to eclipse the 50-point mark, finishing the season with 33 goals, 18 assists, and 51 total points. He nabs the Hart Trophy. In the playoffs, the American division pits the Rangers against third-place Pittsburgh, while the Canadian division sees the Maroons and Senators battle. The 2 first-place division winners, the Canadiens and Bruins, receive first-round playoff byes. The Rangers, 6-4, and Maroons, 3-1, win their total goal series. The Rangers, 6-4, and Maroons, 3-1, win their total goal series. In the semifinals, the Maroons top the Canadiens in total goals, 3-2. The Rangers upset Boston with a 1-1 tie and 4-1 shellacking to earn the berth in the Stanley Cup Finals. The Maroons win Game 1 of the Finals 2-0, but a bizarre episode occurs in Game 2. Lester Patrick, coach of the Rangers, is forced to play goal after Laurent Chabot is hit in the eye by a Nell Stewart shot. Lester Patrick sparks the Rangers to a 2-1 victory in Game 2 of the Finals. Frank Boucher wins it with a goal in overtime. The Maroons take Game 3 of the Finals 2-1 as the Rangers stick Joe Miller, borrowed from the New York Americans, in goal. Game 4 of the Finals goes to the Rangers as sub Joe Miller records a 1-0 shutout. The Rangers' Frank Boucher scores twice in Game 5 as the Rangers win 2-1 and nab their first Stanley Cup. On March 31st, 1928, Gordie Howe is born in Laurel, Saskatchewan. Canada skates off with its third straight Olympic hockey gold medal. When grocery store magnate Charles F. Adams put NHL hockey on the Boston market, he hired Art Ross to stock the shelves. Ross reigned as manager and sometimes coach of the Bruins for 30 years, signing such stars as Bill Cowley, Cooney Weiland, and Milt Schmidt. Ross, who coached Boston to a first-place finish in the American Division in 1927-28, also saw the NHL adopt his goal net that season. You'd recognize the design. It's the same one, still in use today. The Canadian Olympic team captured its third straight gold medal at the 1928 Olympic Games in St. Moritz, Switzerland. Represented by the Toronto varsity grads, the Canadians didn't allow a goal in their three-game championship round, routing Sweden 11-0, Great Britain 14-0, and Switzerland 13-0. Throughout the latter part of the Roaring Twenties, the NHL was blessed with superstar forwards such as Howie Morenz and Bill Cook, and glittering goaltenders like George Hainsworth and Lawrence Bott. But a truly magnetic defenseman didn't surface until Eddie Shore was auctioned off by the failing Pacific Coast Hockey Association and reported to the Bruins in 1926. Shore was brash beyond belief and had a thirst for mayhem. In his second NHL season, 1927-28, Shore set a penalty record with 165 minutes worth of fouls. Shore's boisterousness was immediately transferred to the Boston crowd until it was impossible to determine which was the catalyst for the mania, the frenetic Bruins audience or the player, Shore. Shore was downright vicious on the ice, flattening foes with some of the hardest body crunches known to hockey. Moreover, he was indestructible. Shore once broke 3 ribs in a game in New York. The damage was so severe that the Bruins left him in the care of a physician and hopped on a train for a game in Montreal. Meanwhile, Eddie stumbled to his hotel lobby and hailed a cab for Grand Central Station, where he had purchased a ticket for the late train to Montreal. He arrived in time for the game with Canadians and wound up playing. He scored 2 goals, added an assist to boot. In Shore's day, it was an unwritten rule that defensemen remain at or near the blue line instead of launching offensive rushes. But Shore broke the rule constantly. He took advantage of his great skating strides and managed to tally 12 goals and 7 assists in 1928-29, placing 6th in scoring in the American Division. Shore's scoring exploits continued through the 1930s, a decade in which he won 4 Hart trophies. But his scoring ability never overshadowed his defensive work, which covered the spectrum. Shore could poke check and hook check with extreme finesse, and body check with consummate ferocity. Shore's abnormally long stride built up momentum that carried him down the ice with frightening speed, said writer-editor Ed Fitzgerald. His chilling disregard for personal safety enabled him to maintain peak speed to a point well beyond the limit dared by lesser men. The result was that he came up consistently with plays that other stars were lucky to duplicate once in a lifetime. Shore, who teamed with defenseman Lionel Hitchman, became truly dominating during the 28-29 season, during which the Bruins amassed a 13-game undefeated string. His defensive work enabled Boston's rookie goaltender Cecil Tiny Thompson to produce a dozen shutouts and a 1.18 goals against average. The Shore-Hitchman-Thompson combination orchestrated a first-place finish in the NHL's American Division. After knocking off the powerful Canadians in the playoffs, the Bruins then ousted the Rangers in 2 games, 2-0 and 2-1, for Boston's first Stanley Cup. Eddie Shore was known as the toughest man on skates. He wasn't particularly vicious, he was just absolutely single-minded. If you got in his way, he would hurt you. Shore was a defenseman, though he scored with ease. In 1928-29, he tied for second in scoring on the Bruins while maintaining a very tight defense. The Bruins finished first in the American Division and won the Stanley Cup, largely on the back of the remarkable Shore. The NHL now permits forward passing in the defensive and neutral zone to attacking zone from the neutral zone. However, forward passing is still not allowed in the offensive zone. A minor penalty will now be assessed to any player who delays the game by passing the puck into his own defensive zone. Regulation ties will now result in a 10-minute, non-sudden death overtime period. All the offensive rule changes cannot steal the thunder from Canadians goalie George Hainsworth, who records 22 shutouts, a mark that has never been approached. His .98 goals against average is also the greatest ever. The Canadians roar to the top of the Canadian division with a record of 22-7-15. Montreal loses just 3 road games, an NHL mark. The Americans finished 9 points behind Montreal thanks to Roy Waters' 1.21 goals against average and 13 shutouts. Waters wins the Hart Trophy. Toronto finds a new phenom in Ace Bailey. The speedy winger leads the NHL in goals with 22 and points with 32. Chicago sets an all-time NHL record by being shut out in 8 straight games. The Canadians, with much assistance from George Hainsworth, pieced together a 17-game unbeaten streak that takes them through January and February. Detroit's Carson Cooper leads the American Division in scoring with just 27 points, 18 of those being goals. New York Rangers center Frank Boucher leads the NHL in assists with 16 and captures his second Lady Byng trophy. Chicago's Charlie Gardner posts a 1.93 goals against average, yet his record is 7-29-8. Rookie goalie Cecil Thompson leads the NHL in victories with 26 as Boston wins the American Division. The Rangers trade Laurent Chabot to the Maple Leafs and install John Roach as their goalie. Roach helps New York to a second-place finish behind Boston with a 1.40 goals against average. The playoffs begin with a new format. The first, second, and third-place teams from each division face their opposite number in the other division. In the opening round of the playoffs, Toronto and Detroit, third-place finishers in their respective divisions, play a two-game total goal series. The Maple Leafs win the series 7-2. The New York Americans and the New York Rangers meet in a hometown clash. The teams fight to a scoreless tie in Game 1, and the Rangers win it in double overtime in Game 2. Montreal and Boston square off in the third opening round series, a best-of-5 matchup, and the Bruins sweep the Habs with a pair of 1-0 wins and a decisive 3-2 victory. The Rangers next face Toronto in round 2. Boston awaits to meet the winner in the Stanley Cup Finals, which will be the best-of-3 format. The best-of-3 semifinals goes to New York in thrilling fashion. The Rangers dispatch the Maple Leafs 1-0 and 2-1 in overtime. Boston's Tiny Thompson shuts out the Rangers in the first game of the finals, and Dick Clapper and Dutch Gaynor score for the Bruins. Boston's Bill Carson breaks a 1-1 tie at 18:02 of the third period to win Game 2 of the finals. The Bruins thus win their first ever Stanley Cup. Although his nickname was Tiny, rookie Cecil Thompson came up big for the Bruins in 28-29, leading the league with 26 victories and posting a 1.18 goals against average. Boston manager Art Ross claimed that he signed Thompson without ever having seen him play. The 23-year-old rookie made good on the Bruins' investment by going undefeated in the 1929 playoffs, allowing only 3 goals in 5 games. In 1928-29, the year of the goalie, one netminder stood above all others. The Canadiens' George Hainsworth allowed only 43 goals and recorded an astounding 22 shutouts. His .98 goals against average remains the greatest NHL mark of all time, while his 22 goose eggs are even more than anyone else has ever recorded. The Canadiens won 22 games, lost 7, and tied 15, many of which were 0-0 stalemates. Roy Shrimp Waters joined New York Americans in 1928, quickly established himself as one of the league's best netminders. It was quite the honor, considering the mind-blowing numbers put up by goalie George Hainsworth and Tiny Thompson. With a 1.21 goals against average and 13 shutouts, Waters won this year's Hart Trophy. Rangers Bill Cook, Frank Boucher, and Bun Cook all reached double digits in goals in 1928-29. Quite an achievement in a season that saw teams score at a goal and a half per game rate. Boucher, known as Raffles due to his creative on-ice playmaking, led the league with 16 assists. Hauntingly, this threesome was known as the Breadline, a sight that would become quite common in North America after the stock market crash of 1929. Ace Bailey was the trump card in the Toronto forward line. The Leafs' deck wasn't yet stacked with talent, but Bailey and line mates Andy Blair and Dan Cox were an impressive unit. In 1928-29, Bailey led all league scorers with 22 goals and 32 points, finishing runner-up for the Hart Trophy. A versatile skater, Bailey also took turns on defense, where he teamed up with Hap Day to form an explosive backline duo. In the late 1920s, the Boston Bruins were renowned for their formidable defense, led by goalie Tiny Thompson and defenseman Eddie Shore. If the Bruins could beef up their attacking units, many thought they would really be in business. This was accomplished with a vengeance in the 1929-30 campaign thanks to the managerial genius of Art Ross. Ross fused a forward line comprised of right wing Aubrey Dick Clapper, center Ralph Cooney Weiland, and left wing Norman Dutch Gaynor, and they became instant terrors. The Dynamite Trio, as the line became known, was spearheaded by Weiland, who garnered an NHL record 73 points, 43 goals, and 30 assists. Weiland had more than double the statistics of Toronto's Ace Bailey, who led the league in scoring the previous year with 32 points. The 1929-30 Bruins posted a record of 38-5-1, the greatest mark the NHL has ever seen. What made their performance more impressive was the exceptionally high quality of the opposition. The Rangers, Cook brothers and Boucher, Canadiens, Morens and Joliot, the Maroons, Nels, Stewart, each had formidable teams from goaltending on out, but the Bruins were still far better than anyone else. At one point, the Beantowners won 14 games in a row. Not only did Weiland lead the league in scoring, but Clapper finished second in goals with 41 and third in points with 61. Eddie Shore kicked up his game another notch, while goalie Tiny Thompson won his first Vezina trophy thanks to a goals against average of 2.23. He was now being compared with such accomplished contemporaries as George Hainsworth and Roy Shrimp Waters. Despite their powerhouse regular season performance and a thrashing of the Maroons in the playoffs, Boston fell in the Stanley Cup Finals to the Canadiens. The Bruins were clearly better than the Habs, but the finals in those days were merely a best-of-3 affair. Anything could happen in such a short series, as the Bruins found out. When the Cup Finals opened at Boston Garden on April 1st, 1930, the Bruins were without Gaynor. His loss was sorely felt as Canadians shut out Boston 3-0. Surprisingly, the Habs scoring was opened by Albert Battleship Leduc, who had tallied only 6 goals all season. The second game was played at the Montreal Forum, and Gaynor returned to the Bruins lineup. Boston manager Art Ross was hoping his crack defense of Lionel Hitchman and Shore would thwart the Canadians, while Clapper and company would provide the scoring, but it wasn't to be. Inspired by the home crowd, the Canadiens jumped out to a 3-0 lead, thanks largely to Morenz and Pitt Lapine. Shore ignited a Bruins comeback, pulling Boston to within a goal of a tie. As the clock trickled down, though, a Boston goal by Weiland was disallowed because he kicked it in. The Habs prevailed 4-3 and swept the Bruins in the series in 2 games. The very next year, the Stanley Cup Finals were extended to a best-of-5 series. The Detroit Cougars, who joined the NHL in 26-27, changed their name to the Falcons. A new NHL rule allows forward passing in all zones, while another rule permits players to kick the puck, although not into the goal. Also, goalies may no longer freeze the puck. They must clear it immediately after a save. High-sticking penalties are introduced as the league tries to reduce its inherent violence. An offside rule is written. It prohibits an attacking player from preceding the puck into the enemy zone. The NHL scoring skyrockets from 642 goals in 1928-29 to 1,301 goals in 1929-1930. The Bruins win the American Division by 30 points over Chicago. Their 38-5-1 record is the greatest NHL mark of all time, and their 14-game winning streak and 20-game home winning streak set NHL records. Ralph Cooney Weiland sparks the Bruins with a record-setting 43-goal, 73-point season. The Rangers' Frank Boucher tallies a record 36 assists and wins his 3rd straight Lady Byng trophy. Struck in the face by a Howie Morenz shot, Maroons goalie Clint Benedict sets a precedent when he dons a leather mask in a game to protect his broken nose. On December 14, 1929, Montreal's Pitt Lapine erupts for 5 goals against Ottawa's Alex Connell. On December 19, 1929, Pittsburgh's Johnny McKinnon and Toronto's Hap Day make history when the two defensemen each notch 4 goals in the same game. In the late 1910s, when goalies were required to remain on their feet to make a save, Clint Benedict refused to conform to the league rule. He continually flopped to the ice, forcing the league to change its rule and allow netminders to drop and stop. As a result, goalies took their fair share of pucks and sticks to the face. After breaking his nose for the 3rd time in the season 1929-1930, Benedict created a leather mask and wore it for a couple of games. The fortunes of America's steel-making industry collapsed with the rest of the industrial world in 1929. In Pittsburgh, the weight was shared by the hockey club. The Pittsburgh Pirates, one of hockey's most feudal organizations, endured a horrific 5-36-3 season, setting NHL records for most goals allowed, 185, and fewest victories in a 44-game season. After the 29-30 campaign, the Pirates packed it in and moved across the state to Philadelphia. Hap Day didn't have to play professional hockey. He would have been just as content to issue remedies from behind the counter of his Toronto pharmacy. However, Conn Smythe had bigger plans for the talented Day and made him the Leafs' first captain and the leader of the team's defensive corps. From his dispensary on the blue line, Day led all Toronto rearguards in 1929-30 with 7 goals, including 4 in one game. Sadly, the name Nels Stewart is too often a forgotten one. Old Poison, as he was known, played a rugged 15 years with the Montreal Maroons, Boston Bruins, and New York Americans. In 1929-30, with the Maroons, Stewart scored 39 goals and had 16 assists in his 44 games, leading the team in first place in the Canadian division. The Maroons, however, were overpowered by the Bruins in the first round of the playoffs. Coming off a Stanley Cup championship season, Dick Clapper had the best year of his long and admirable career in 1929-30. Clapper had scored only 9 goals in 28-29 and was never known for a high scorer, but the taste of winning made him hunger for more, and he potted 41 goals and earned 20 assists in 1929-30. The Bruins finished at the top of the American Division, but were stopped cold by Montreal's George Hainsworth in the finals. After George Hainsworth racked up 22 shutouts in 1928-29, the NHL introduced forward passing rules, making the job of the puck stopper that much harder. No one took more advantage of the new edicts than Boston's Cooney Weiland, who scored an NHL record 43 goals in 44 games in 1929-30. Weiland and his Beantown teammates dominated the NHL, scoring a league-high 179 goals while allowing a league-low 98 goals. On March 18, 1930, Montreal center Howie Morenz lights the lamp 5 times against the New York Americans. Tight defense is not totally absent as Boston's Tiny Thompson leads all goalies in wins with 38 and goals against average with 2.23. The Maroons' Nell Stewart tallies 39 goals and 55 points and carries his club to a first-place finish in the regular season. He's awarded the Hart Trophy, his second. The playoffs match the Canadiens and Blackhawks' second-place finishers in their respective divisions, and the Rangers and Senators' third-place finishers in total goal series. The Habs shut out Chicago 1-0 in the first game, then extend the second game to triple overtime with the score 2-2. The game is called at 11:43 of the third OT, giving Montreal the series 3-2. The Rangers easily skate past Ottawa, winning 5-2 in the second match after Game 1 ended 1-1. In the playoff meeting of division winners, Boston beats the Maroons 3-1. The Bruins await the winner of the Canadiens-Rangers series. Game 1 between the Canadiens and the Rangers goes to quadruple overtime. Montreal's Gus Rivers beats John Roach after nearly 7 periods of heart-stopping hockey. The Rangers are spent in Game 2 as Montreal beats them 2-0 to clinch a berth in the finals. Riding high in emotion, the Habs shut down the Bruins' powerful offense, winning the first game of the finals 3-0. The Habs clinched the Stanley Cup with a 4-3 victory in Game 2 as Howie Morenz scores the winner at 17:50 of the second period. Early in 1930, most hockey analysts predicted that the Boston Bruins would become the NHL's first post-expansion dynasty. Their Stanley Cup victory in 1929 and regular season runaway a year later suggested an endless skein of championships. That is, until the Montreal Canadiens quickly disposed of them in the 1930 Stanley Cup Finals. The Habs' ascension was based on the maturation of several key players, but none was more critical to the Canadiens than Howie Morenz, also known as the Stratford Flash. Although not French-Canadian, his roots were traced to Switzerland. Morenz epitomized the elan of the Montreal team. Of all the flying Frenchmen, Morenz flew highest and fastest of all. "The kid's too fast," said one observer. "He'll burn himself out." "He's the hardest player in the league to stop," said Boston Bruins defenseman Eddie Shore. "Howie comes at you with such speed and it's almost impossible to block him with a body check. When he hits you, he usually comes off a lot better than the defenseman." Morenz won the 30-31 scoring crown, 28 goals and 23 assists for 51 points, and also annexed the Hart Trophy. The Canadiens finished in first place with a record of 26-10-8 and battled the rival Bruins in the playoffs. The series went the full allotment of games, with Montreal squeaking by with 3-2 win in Game 5. That victory sent the Canadiens to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Chicago Blackhawks. The connection was primarily responsible for Montreal's Stanley Cup victory. Although the Canadiens won the first game 2-1, they lost a heartbreaker in Game 2 double overtime and Game 3 triple overtime. The Canadiens took Game 4 4-2, tying the best-of-5 round at 2 games apiece. In the final match, Morenz scored late in the game, giving Montreal a 2-0 victory and its second straight Stanley Cup. After 4th and 5th place finishes, the struggling Pittsburgh Pirates relocate to Philadelphia and change their name to the Quakers. The NHL introduces the use of a 4-sided scoreboard clock in some arenas, and it sanctions the use of farm teams by several NHL clubs. According to legend, Toronto manager Conn Smythe bets on a long shot horse to raise money to pry King Clancy from Ottawa. He wins, and Clancy becomes a Leaf. The Habs' Howie Morenz wins his second scoring title with 51 points. He also nabs his second Hart Trophy. Toronto sophomore Charlie Conacher leads the league in goals with 31. Ranger Bill Cook has 30. Toronto center Joe Primo, playing between Busher Jackson and Ace Bailey, notches a league-high 32 assists. Detroit's talented second-year center Ebby Goodfellow finishes second in the points race with 48. Maroon center Nell Stewart sets an all-time NHL record when he scores 2 goals just 4 seconds apart on January 3rd of 1931 in a 5-3 win over Boston. Americans goaltender Roy Waters earns his first Vezina Trophy as New York gives up the fewest goals in the league with 74. The Lady Byng Trophy is presented to Frank Boucher of the Rangers for the 4th straight season. In an attempt to promote hockey during the Depression, the NHL introduces its first All-Star team. Boston's Eddie Shore leads all backliners in scoring with 31 points and second overall in penalty minutes with 108. Blackhawks goaltender Charlie Gardner leads the NHL with a dozen shutouts. Chicago, second in the American Division, outscores Toronto, second in the Canadian Division, 4-3 in a 2-game total goal series. The Rangers, third in the American, trounced the Maroons, third in the Canadian Division, 8-1 in their series. In the best-of-5 semifinal between the Canadiens and the Bruins, each team posts an overtime victory and enters Game 5 tied at 2 games apiece. Montreal's George Hainsworth outduels Boston's Tiny Thompson in the decisive 5th game as the Canadiens skate to a 3-2 overtime victory in Montreal. The Canadians beat Chicago 2-1 in Game 1 of the finals as Pitt Lapine notches the winner. Game 2 goes double overtime before Chicago's Johnny Gotzeling snaps a 1-1 tie. Game 3 goes to 13:50 of triple overtime, tied 2-2 before Chicago's Cy Wentworth nets the winner. Despite leading 2-1 in the third period with the championship in sight, the Hawks fizzle, let the Habs score 3 unanswered goals. Montreal wins 4-2, sends the series to a 5th game. The Hawks have no ammunition left as Canadians win Game 5 2-0 and hoist their second straight Stanley Cup. Hockey is played between two opposing teams, but each team has another player to factor into the game: the time clock. Beginning in the 1930-31 season, fans, players, and officials were able to stay in the game from any angle in the arena, watching the seconds tick away on all four sides of the Mammoth Marvel. There have been many bad hockey teams in the history of the NHL, but the Philadelphia Quakers of 1930-31 were likely the worst team of all time. With a threadbare lineup and a porous defense, the Quakers went 4-36-4 and were outscored 184-76. Not even the city of brotherly love could embrace these unlovable losers, and one-year blunder team was ridden out of town, never to return. Conn Smythe knew that if the Leafs were to blossom into Stanley Cup champions, he needed power, speed, and the luck of the Irish. He found all three in Frank King Clancy. Despite the bad economic times, Smythe was able to find a ransom to bring the King to Hogtown. In 1930-31, Clancy, a two-time Stanley Cup winner with Ottawa, whose talent was matched only by his wit, earned a berth on the NHL's first All-Star team, which debuted in 1930-31. In a world where every man they met waved a stick in their faces, NHL goaltenders had little peace of mind. In the 1930s, goalies were not only expected to play every game, they were expected to perform regardless of being cut, stitched, kicked, or broken. Despite the rigorous demands, goalies Roy Waters and George Hainsworth took their licks and kept on ticking. Waters won the Vezina in 1930-31. Hainsworth won it 3 times previously. Many of the Chronicle clan skated for NHL teams, but only Charlie, the big bomber, shoved and scored his way into the Hockey Hall of Fame. As the trigger man for the Leafs' famed kid line, Charlie led all NHL sharpshooters in goals in 1930-31, blasting 31 pucks over, under, and through NHL goaltenders. He and his kid teammates, Joe Primo and Busher Jackson, were poised to become hockey's best forward unit. Cy Wentworth was not a big man at 5'9" and 170, but he stood his ground behind the Blackhawks' blue line. Dick Irvin, who coached the Hawks in 1930-31, was a big fan of Wentworth, who helped Chicago register the fewest goals against in the American Division. Irvin likely gave Wentworth a bear hug after Game 3 of the 1931 finals, as Cy beat Canadians goalie George Hainsworth in triple overtime to win the game. Conn Smythe was a much-decorated World War I hero who later propelled the University of Toronto hockey clubs to championships in the early 1920s. It was in 1927, however, that he entered the public eye. On February 27th, Smythe purchased the NHL's Toronto St. Patrick's. At his new post, Smythe would become one of the most powerful men in the National Hockey League over the next 30 years. Immediately after purchasing the Toronto team, Smythe changed its name to the Maple Leafs. It was too late to salvage the 1926-27 season. The Leafs were destined for the cellar, so Smythe turned his thoughts to the long-term results. He created a 5-year plan that he thought would vault the Leafs to the top. Smythe traded for many players, including King Clancy and Ottawa Senators defenseman who came to Toronto in 1930 via a racetrack bet. Apparently, Smythe's horse was running at Woodbine Racetrack with odds of 100-1 against. Yet Smythe put his bankroll on his horse and cheered him on to an astonishing victory. With the winnings, he bought Clancy from Ottawa for $35,000 and threw in 2 extra players. Clancy turned out to be worth the hefty price. By the 1931-32 season, Smythe's Leafs were led by the kid line comprised of right-wing Charlie Conacher at age 22, left-wing Busher Jackson at age 20, and center Joe Primo at age 25. The 3 youngsters dominated the league's scoring charts, with Jackson finishing on top with 53 points, 28 of those being goals. Primo finished second in points and led the league in assists with 37, while Conacher placed 4th in scoring and tied for first in goals with 34. Complementing Smythe's splendid sextet was the continent's most spectacular new arena, Maple Leaf Gardens. Work on the Gardens began just 5 months before the start of the 1931-32 season, but amazingly, it was completed by opening day. The arena immediately became to hockey what Yankee Stadium was to baseball. Toronto finished the 1931-32 season with a 23-18-7 record, placing second in the Canadian Division. The Leafs entered the playoffs and met Chicago in a 2-game total series. Behind the Windy City. Behind Charlie Gardner's airtight goaltending, the Blackhawks stifled the Leafs 2-0 in Game 1. In the second game, however, Toronto blew out Chicago 6-0 and advanced to the semifinals where they met the Montreal Maroons. Against the Maroons, the Leafs were again in trouble. They trailed Montreal 3-2 in Game 2 before Hap Day tied the score late in the third period. The Leafs' Bob Gracie then won the match in overtime, putting Toronto in the finals against the Rangers. The Leafs' kid line dominated New York in the finals. They swept the Rangers with the tennis-like scores of 6-4, 6-2, 6-4, and skated off with the Stanley Cup. Smythe had said he needed 5 years to build a winner, and sure enough, 5 years is what it took. I'm Charlie Saunier from the Renegades of Puck, and this has been the 20th Century Hockey Chronicle. If you'd like to support more projects like this, please follow the Renegades of Puck on all social media platforms and also visit renegadesofpuck.com.